Why does his silence suddenly speak louder when you finally stop reaching out? Why does your absence, once unnoticed, now seem to echo in his world? There is a cruel paradox many women know all too well. You give your time, your attention, your softness. You lean in, hoping for closeness. And just when it feels like the connection is forming, he begins to pull away, slowly, subtly, and then unmistakably. Messages go unanswered. His warmth fades into vagueness. You're left staring at a phone that doesn't ring, wondering what you did wrong, what you said, what you should fix. But then something unexpected happens. You stop calling, you stop bending, you retreat into yourself, not as a strategy, but as a survival response. And suddenly, there he is, texting, asking, returning. What is this dynamic? Why does your withdrawal seem to trigger his return? To truly understand this emotional dance, we must step away from romantic illusions and turn towards something more precise: behavioral science. The truth is, this isn't about mystery or even love. It's about conditioning, the invisible patterns of behavior shaped by reinforcement and by the consequences that follow our actions. You see, Skinner, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, argued that freedom doesn't come from wishful thinking. It comes from understanding our behavior and the forces that shape it. If you're caught in the exhausting cycle of chasing and retreating, of giving too much and receiving too little, it's not because you're broken, it's because you've been conditioned. Conditioned to think that love requires effort, always your effort. Conditioned to respond to inconsistency with more giving. Conditioned to confuse anxiety with affection. But here's the liberating truth. You can unlearn what's been reinforced. You can observe, interrupt, and reshape the very patterns that once caused you pain. Operant conditioning explains how behavior is shaped by its consequences, and nowhere is this more relevant than in the realm of modern relationships. Because the moment you stop rewarding inconsistency with attention, a shift begins. When you no longer reinforce withdrawal with pursuit, you stop feeding the very cycle that keeps you emotionally hostage. What if he returns not because he loves you more, but because the reinforcement schedule has changed? This isn't manipulation, it's awareness. And it starts by asking the most powerful question in behavioral psychology. What's being reinforced here? In the next chapter, we'll explore the basic principles of operant conditioning and how your emotional reactions may be training others far more than you realize. To reclaim emotional freedom, we must first understand how our behaviors, and the behaviors of those we love, are shaped not by intention, but by consequence. This is the foundation Skinner's work, the realization that what we do is less about who we are, and more about what's been reinforced. Operant conditioning is the process by which behaviors are increased or decreased based on the consequences they produce. In simple terms, when a behavior is followed by a rewarding outcome, it's more likely to be repeated. When it's followed by discomfort or no reward, it's more likely to disappear. Let's bring this into the emotional realm. When a man sends a warm message and you respond immediately with enthusiasm, you've just reinforced his outreach. If he goes cold and you double your attention, your increased effort may inadvertently reward his distance. Over time, this creates a loop. His withdrawal triggers your chase, and your chase becomes the very thing that conditions his detachment. It's not about blame, it's about awareness. Skinner made an essential distinction between reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement always increases behavior, while punishment decreases it. But there's a deeper layer. Reinforcement can be positive, adding something pleasurable, or negative, removing something unpleasant. So when he reaches out and you give warmth, affection, and emotional reward, that's positive reinforcement. When he avoids conflict and you stay silent to keep the peace, he learns that withdrawal leads to the removal of tension, a form of negative reinforcement. In relationships, both forms can shape behaviors without a single word being spoken. You may think you're choosing patience or grace, but from a behavioral lens, you might be reinforcing a pattern of emotional avoidance. And here lies the emotional trap. We often use reinforcement unconsciously, especially when trying to maintain connection. We offer more of ourselves in the hope of being seen, not realizing that our consistency is reinforcing their inconsistency. Skinner would ask, What behaviors are increasing in frequency, and what role are you playing in that reinforcement? Consider a symbolic story, not just of one woman, but of many. She gives generously. Every time he pulls away, she closes the gap. She softens her boundaries, stays quiet when hurt, apologizes first. She thinks this proves her love, but slowly she starts to notice. The more she gives, the less he values it. He reaches out only when it's convenient. Her availability becomes expected, not cherished. Eventually something breaks. She stops responding, not out of revenge, but out of emotional depletion. She reclaims her space. Her silence is no longer passive, it's a boundary. And what happens? He returns, curious, attentive. "Are you okay?" he asks. But he's not seeking her well-being. He's reacting to the sudden withdrawal of reinforcement. The pattern has been interrupted. Skinner would say, behavior that is no longer reinforced begins to extinguish. The man isn't returning out of depth. He's returning because a predictable source of validation has been removed. He's responding not to her person, but to the change in consequence. This is the hard truth many women resist. His return may not be love. It may be a conditioned response to the absence of reward. The power lies not in pulling back to provoke, but in understanding the entire system of reinforcement and choosing to step out of it altogether. So ask yourself, are you reinforcing behaviors that hurt you, hoping they'll eventually heal you? Some women don't fall for words, they fall for inconsistency, not because they're weak, but because their emotional nervous system has been trained to respond to uncertainty as if it were affection. He texts once, then disappears for days. He's emotionally present, then abruptly cold. And somehow it keeps you engaged, wondering, hoping, checking. Why? Because the most addictive patterns in love are not random, they're scheduled. In behavioral psychology, a reinforcement schedule determines when and how often a behavior is rewarded. This seemingly dry concept is the skeleton beneath many modern relationship dynamics, especially the ones that feel the most confusing. There are two main types: continuous reinforcement, where every effort is rewarded, like a kiss every time you reach for closeness, and intermittent reinforcement, where rewards come inconsistently, unpredictably, and often enough to keep you hooked, but not enough to keep you safe. Skinner demonstrated that behaviors reinforced intermittently are much harder to extinguish. Why? Because uncertainty keeps the brain engaged. It creates a kind of psychological gambling effect. Maybe this time I'll get the connection I want. Like pulling a slot machine lever, we tolerate long stretches of emotional drought, believing the next drop of attention will quench all the past absence. The most potent of these is the variable ratio schedule, where rewards come after an unpredictable number of efforts. You don't know when you'll be seen, validated, or touched. But when it finally happens, the intensity of relief feels like love. But it isn't love, it's relief from emotional hunger. Many women confuse the end of anxiety with the presence of intimacy, and that's the dangerous hook. You're not being loved, you're being trained. Skinner would call this resistance to extinction. The more inconsistent the reward, the more persistent the behavior. In this case, your emotional attachment. Now, let's turn this insight into power. You cannot control someone else's behavior, but you can interrupt the schedule. If you've been reinforcing his inconsistency with consistent attention, you can stop. Not by playing games, but by observing the emotional economy at play and choosing to stop spending your energy where it yields no return. This is the beginning of strategic application. By choosing self-reinforcement, rewarding yourself with peace, clarity, boundaries, you gradually replace the urge for external validation with internal stability. You can also create balanced reinforcement in healthy dynamics. That doesn't mean always being available or always withholding. It means becoming aware of when you're reinforcing neediness or avoidance in others and adjusting. Some responses deserve a boundary, not a reward. Some silences deserve silence in return. Skinner might remind you, you are always training others in how to engage with you. Are you rewarding inconsistency with more emotional labor? Are you reinforcing distance by closing the gap every time? When you stop reacting, something powerful happens. Behavior loses its fuel. The man who pulled away may try to return, not because he changed, but because the system that once reinforced his emotional laziness is no longer functioning. And you begin to reclaim your time, your clarity, your center. So ask yourself, what if the silence you fear is actually the beginning of your healing? In the next chapter, we'll explore how you can go even deeper, not just by stopping destructive patterns, but by shaping new, healthier behaviors in your relationships. Through conscious reinforcement, emotional alignment, and consistent boundaries, not all change begins with a rupture. Sometimes it begins with a subtle shift, a quiet refusal to keep participating in what depletes you. Behavioral science doesn't just explain how we get stuck in painful patterns, it also offers a map for how we shape something new, gradually, deliberately, and without emotional chaos. The process Skinner called shaping is one of the most powerful tools for transformation, not only in how we train others to treat us, but in how we reclaim agency over our emotional lives. Shaping is the reinforcement of successive approximations, small steps that build toward a desired behavior. Rather than expecting a man to suddenly become emotionally available or relationally mature, shaping invites us to notice and reward even slight movements in that direction, while refusing to feed the patterns that pull us backward. But here's the part no one tells you. Shaping doesn't start with him, it starts with you. You shape your relationships every time you decide what you tolerate, what you respond to, and what you feed with your attention. And the longer you respond to breadcrumbs with feasts, the more you reinforce emotional starvation as a norm. Let's begin with the first layer of shaping, successive approximations toward emotional connection. When a man shows a small step toward vulnerability, sharing something personal, admitting a mistake, listening with presence, that behavior can be reinforced by your genuine engagement, not by overgiving. A calm, measured response rooted in your own emotional maturity can be more reinforcing than praise or emotional flooding. You're not rewarding the drama, you're reinforcing the depth. And when he pulls away, avoids emotional truth, or reverts to inconsistency, the shaping principle reminds us, do not reinforce regressions. That means no chasing, no over-explaining, no self-abandoning in the hope that your love will bring him back. He's not a project, he's a participant, or he's not. If he wants to be part of the journey, he must earn proximity through behavior, not just promises. Skinner would see these dynamics as a system of consequences. Each time you bend your boundaries to accommodate his avoidance, you remove the natural discomfort that might have prompted him to grow. You become a buffer. You shield him from his own behavioral consequences, and in doing so, you stop his learning. The second layer of shaping involves setting emotional goals inside the relationship. Not idealistic fantasies, but observable behaviors, consistency, honesty, respectful communication. If those aren't present, no amount of chemistry or compatibility can replace them. These are the foundations of emotional security, and like any behavior, they can be invited, but not forced. Clarity is your most powerful reinforcer. When you say, "This is the kind of connection I'm available for, and this is what I won't entertain," you're not giving an ultimatum. You're setting a contingency, a behavioral boundary. You're shaping the emotional environment so that healthy behaviors are reinforced and harmful ones face extinction. This isn't control, this is responsibility. Now we arrive at the third layer, monitoring and adjusting. Relationships are not static, and neither are reinforcement patterns. As intimacy deepens, what once felt safe may begin to feel suffocating. What once required reassurance may now require space. The key is awareness. Skinner's brilliance wasn't just in defining behavior, it was in tracking patterns over time. Do you feel more anxious in the relationship now than you did 3 months ago? Is the emotional labor increasing while the emotional return is decreasing? That may be a sign that the reinforcement has become imbalanced. Are you giving more than is being reciprocated? Are you still responding with the same availability to behaviors that now feel neglectful? In shaping, we adjust, we recalibrate, we evolve. And here a symbolic story can help us see what this looks like in motion. She once thought love meant endurance. She stayed quiet when hurt, stayed loyal when lonely, stayed hopeful when overlooked. She shaped her world around his comfort, believing that patience would one day be rewarded with depth. But years passed. He grew used to the shape of her selflessness, and she grew exhausted. Then, Slowly, she stopped, not dramatically, but meaningfully. She began reinforcing different behaviors, rewarding her own solitude with peace, her boundaries with self-respect. When he reached out sporadically, she didn't punish him, but she didn't reward the inconsistency either. He felt the difference. She was no longer participating in the pattern. Over time, she began to see who he really was. Not the man he could become, but the man he kept choosing to be. And from this clarity, she shaped her exit, not out of anger, but out of truth. Because shaping is not about fixing someone, it's about creating a structure where the kind of love you want can actually grow. Skinner would remind us, behavior always adapts to its consequences. The question is, are you shaping a relationship that honors your emotional integrity, or one that only survives on your silence? You get to choose what you reinforce. You get to decide what ends. So here is your practice, your symbolic action. Write down 3 behaviors you want to see more of, from others and from yourself. Be specific. Then ask, what am I currently doing that reinforces these? And what might I need to stop reinforcing? Sometimes the greatest transformation isn't in how someone changes, but in how you respond to what never did. Every time you learn to observe rather than react, you reclaim a piece of your power. Every time you stop reinforcing what hurts you, you write a new behavioral script, one where love is no longer confused with survival. Let's revisit what you now understand, not just intellectually, but emotionally. You've seen how operant conditioning, the shaping of behavior through reinforcement and punishment, plays out in our most intimate relationships. You've learned how positive reinforcement, offering something rewarding, and negative reinforcement, removing discomfort, shape not only how others treat you, but how you treat yourself. You now recognize the insidious pull of intermittent reinforcement, the emotional casino where attention, affection, and closeness are handed out unpredictably. Like a slot machine that occasionally pays out, it keeps you invested long after you should have walked away, because it's not love that hooks you. It's the possibility of love. And that possibility, reinforced just enough to keep you trying, becomes a prison dressed as hope. B.F. Skinner never spoke of heartbreak, but he understood behavior. He understood that the environment teaches us who we have to be in order to receive approval, safety, and attachment. If your nervous system flinches every time your needs arise, it may be because inconsistency was your first teacher. If your silence feels safer than your truth, it's because it was once reinforced as the price of peace. But here's what makes you powerful. You can become your own teacher now. You can reverse engineer the dynamics that once held you hostage. You can observe what's being rewarded and what needs to be extinguished. You can stop participating in cycles that rely on your confusion, because clarity is the one reinforcement inconsistency cannot survive. You don't have to chase love that disappears when you stop running. You don't have to reward emotional absence with emotional labor. The man who returns after you stop reaching isn't necessarily returning for you. He may simply be reacting to the withdrawal of reinforcement, the absence of validation he came to expect. This doesn't make him evil. It makes him conditioned. But if you mistake that return for renewed affection, you risk being pulled back into the very cycle that diminished you. Ask yourself, does his return come with new behavior, or just old patterns redressed as promises? And here lies the deeper work. Reinforcement isn't just something you apply to others, it's something you apply to yourself. When you say no and your body exhales, that's reinforcement. When you stop apologizing for needing space and feel peace instead of panic, that's reinforcement. When you let someone walk away and realize your world didn't collapse, that's reinforcement. The woman who knows her patterns can rewrite them. She no longer rewards charm without consistency. She no longer answers to breadcrumbs with a feast. She no longer confuses absence with mystery or silence with depth. Skinner would see this as a shift in contingencies, a reorganization of your behavioral environment. What once triggered anxiety now triggers discernment. What once needed reaction now receives reflection. In this space, new kinds of relationships become possible. Ones built on reciprocity, not volatility. On honesty, not performance, because you're no longer reinforcing chaos in the name of connection. So here is your closing reflection, and it's not theoretical. Look back over the last relationship that left you confused. Ask yourself, what behaviors did I reinforce even unintentionally? What did I tolerate, hoping it would turn into love? What did I stop asking for, just to keep the peace? And most importantly, what part of me believed that intermittent affection was the best I could get? These aren't easy questions, but they're the questions that set you free. And here's the final practice. For the next week, observe, without judgment, what behaviors you reinforce in others. But more importantly, observe how you reinforce your own value or erode it. Do you soothe your loneliness with clarity or with self-doubt? Do you validate your boundaries or explain them away? If you want others to treat you with consistency, presence, and respect, start by making those non-negotiable in how you treat yourself, because here is the truth most never hear. The woman you're becoming doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't reinforce the very thing that breaks her. She pauses, she observes, she chooses, and in that pause she finds something deeper than control. She finds freedom. Emotional freedom begins where guilt ends. Now I invite you to reflect and share. What patterns have you begun to see in your past or present relationships? Have you identified moments where you unknowingly reinforced emotional neglect or inconsistency? Leave your insights in the comments. Your voice might be the mirror someone else needs. And if this spoke to you, subscribe for deeper explorations into female psychology, behavior, and the quiet revolution of emotional clarity. You're not difficult. You just stopped settling for less.